Hi, I'm Dr. Sara Shields, Regional Horticulture Coordinator here in the Central Region with the LSU AgCenter. Today I'm going through and assessing some of our landscape beds, specifically those where we are trialing some of the plants in the Louisiana Super Plant Program. And while I could add some plants in containers right now, I really want to prevent undue stress to the plant material added. So I'm taking notes and deciding what plants I want to plant later this fall. Fall is a great time for planting a lot of our trees and shrubs because the weather's cooler. We generally receive a little bit more rainfall, and the plants are still growing, but they're slowing down as they're entering a dormant period. So a couple of the things that I want to keep in mind when I go to look for plant material that I want to add to our landscape beds, first of all, I'm going to consider the spacing that I have. So I need to consider the mature height and the mature width of the plant material that I'm considering to add, just to make sure I have enough space in the landscape for it. I'm also going to consider the amount of sun that these demonstration gardens receive. You can see I'm in more of our shade bed right now. So those plants need filtered sunlight during the day. They can tolerate some late afternoon sun, but I really want to protect them most of the time. Whereas some of our demonstration gardens are out in full sun, and those plants need a good 8 to 10 hours of sun in order to have adequate blooms and to continue to grow and to thrive. I also want to consider the amount of rainfall and the amount of water the plants need, so that all of the plants that are in this shade bed all need about the same amount of water. I don't want to go in and group some plants that need high water needs with those with low water needs, because some of those plants are just not going to be happy. I'll consider the amount of sunlight, the shade, the water needs, mature size. I'll also consider soil type. So here on the station we have some heavier soils, some more clay soils. So a lot of times we'll end up planting into raised beds or in containers, again, just to help keep the plants a little bit happier. So with those general notes in mind, and you can replicate the same thing for your own landscape, it's time for me to head to the nursery and look at what plant materials I'm going to be selecting. Visiting the nursery is my favorite part of the plant selection process. After all, I've gone through and assessed the site to determine my plant needs based on sun and shade exposure, moisture needs, and spacing that I have available to accommodate the plants that I want to install in the landscape. When I arrive at the nursery, I'll typically walk around, look at the new plant material available on the market, and then I'll go in and look at selecting the specific plant material that I'm looking for, depending on if I'm installing plants in my home landscape or those in the demonstration gardens. Regardless of where the plants will be located, I always double check the plant labels that come on the plant material, because I want to double check and make sure that even though I did my research, I want these plants to match up and work for the specific areas that I have in mind. The plant labels will include information on the genus and species and even the variety name. And that's important to note because some varieties of the same genus and same species, the varieties may vary in their mature size. So you want to make sure that you pick something that works for you. The plant labels will also give general information on use and care instructions in terms of their sun and shade exposure needs, their water needs, and they'll even list their growing zone. It's important to remember that here in the Central Region, we're in growing zone 8. This specific double wreath spirea is hardy zones 5 through 9. So I know that it will work in this area, and I don't need to worry about losing it if we were to receive some harsh winter weather. Failure to keep these considerations in mind is where I see most homeowners get in trouble when I make home visits to help assess landscape issues. And it's typically that the plants have gotten too big for the space where they're planted. So the only way to remedy that is either to remove those plants completely or to constantly have to prune to keep that size down to a more manageable level. Most of the time I see this issue in shrubs and sometimes in crepe myrtles as well. The other issue I commonly see is plants that are planted too close together. Big issue, it makes a nice hedge, but the big issue with this is that that plant material is interwoven, and it can be an area where you have increased insect or disease pressure, and that can be a little bit more difficult to control when you can't get in there and adequately manage the issue. Now I'd like to take a moment and go through some of the selection factors that I consider when I visit a nursery to look at plant material to either bring back to my home landscape or that plant material that I want to introduce into the demonstration gardens at the Dean Lee Research and Extension Center. My first selection factor that I'm going to look at is the overall shape. So you see 3 Shoal Creek Vitex in front of me. The one right in the center, to me, has the nicest overall shape. It has tons of new foliage on it, new growth. This will come in handy later on when the plant continues to mature and I can have some selective pruning. I'll have plenty of plant material to work with. As you can see, the plant over to my left and the plant to my right, there's nothing wrong with this plant material, but I do have a few gaps on each of the plants. So again, if I were to choose between the 3, I would go with this plant that's right in front of me. My next selection factors that I'll look at is I want my plants to have strong, sturdy stems. We live in central Louisiana. We're no stranger to thunderstorms and storms all year round. So plants that have strong, sturdy stems will be able to withstand those high winds and fare much better than some of our other plant material with much weaker branches and stems. The third selection factor that I'll look at is I want to inspect for disease and insect pressure. These 3 plants, I don't see anything wrong with them, but if I were to see some insects, I would want to make sure that I have an accurate ID on those. I wouldn't want to bring something home from the nursery and accidentally introduce new insects into my landscape that I'm going to have to worry about managing. The same thing with disease. So if I go with insect and disease-free plants to start with, I'm much better in the long run. The fourth factor that I'll look at is I want to inspect my roots. So I actually do this at the nursery, and I will very carefully work the plant material out of the black plastic pot. So I'll put my hand over the soil substrate and I'll work it out, and I'll remove that black container and I'll actually look at the roots. So this root ball has nice roots, plenty of roots that has reached this outer wall, nice color to the roots. I don't have what I would consider to be a root bound or pot bound plant. So I should have no issues getting this plant acclimated into my landscape. Some people will make a selection factor based on the flowers that are present on the plant material. I don't like to do that because remember, most of our perennial plants will bloom for 4, 6, 8 weeks at the most. So I may be going to look at plant material when the flowers are not in bloom. So it's important to know what plant material you're looking for and doing that research ahead of time so that you'll know what the foliage looks like and it'll work in the landscape, because that's what you'll have most of the year. What I like about the Shoal Creek Vitex is this finer foliage. It makes a great small specimen tree in the landscape. After I've gone through all those selection factors, I'll make my final determinations on what plant materials to bring back to the demonstration gardens, and I'll work on getting those installed. Again, I'm going to wait for the cooler months this fall, late September, October, even early November, to give the plants a little bit of a head start going into winter, and then hopefully we have some nice cooler temperatures at that time. We invite you to come on out to our demonstration gardens at the Dean Lee Research and Extension Center, right there across from the LSU campus, to see what plant materials we have planted in our demonstration gardens and visit with some of the horticulture agents to discuss some of the horticulture efforts we're working on for the region.